Hello everyone, it's Q here. Lately I've been seeing a lot of posts about people having issues accessing private endpoints, specifically not being able to resolve the host name after they've created the endpoint. I more so see this issue when someone is running a custom DNS server on premises and they're pointing all of their local machines to that DNS server. I want to make this video to show how simple it is to deploy your private endpoint while using Azure DNS. So by the end of this video, you should be able to go into your own environment and deploy a private endpoint and not have any issues accessing that private endpoint. All right, I want to give a brief overview about specifically what we will be doing today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a private DNS zone as well as create that private endpoint. And also, we are going to configure a DNS forwarder within Azure. And also, we are going to configure our local on-prem DNS server to conditionally forward all queries for blob to our DNS forwarder. I don't have a site-to-site VPN set up yet from my lab to Azure. So in order to access this resource, I am going to be using Cloudflare. All right, so before we get into configuring our private endpoint and our DNS servers, I just want to show you that I have a test blob storage here set up within a storage account. I'm going to try to access a file I have within this blob storage. As you can see, it says this request is not authorized to perform this operation. That is because I have public access set to private for this blob container. As well, I'm going to go down here to networking. I have public network access disabled. So unless you have a connection within that private network, you cannot access this resource. All right, so in order to be able to access this blob container, I'm going to need to attach a private endpoint to it. So I'm just going to go back to my overview blade here of my storage account, and to attach a private endpoint to the blob storage, I'm just going to come over here to the security and networking tab. I'm going to click on networking, and once I'm here, I'm going to click on the private endpoint connections tab. From here, you're going to click Add Private Endpoint, and you're going to select your subscription. You're going to select the resource group, and I am going to name my private endpoint. I'm going to call it Test, and I'm going to put it in East US region. The big thing with region is if your resource is within your private endpoint must be in the same resource, the same region as your resource. It can be in a different VNet, but it must be in the same region. As long as the VNets are peered, you shouldn't have any issues connecting. So after we selected our region and named it, we're going to click on Next, and we're going to select the target sub-resource. We are dealing with blob storage, so I'm going to select blob here as my sub resource. All right, and then for the virtual network, as I said earlier, it really doesn't have to be in the same virtual network as the actual resource, as long as the virtual networks are peered. But for this scenario, I'm just going to put it in the same virtual network. Private IP configuration, I am going to let Azure go ahead and dynamically assign an IP address for me. You can choose to give it whatever IP address you want, but I'm going to go ahead and let Azure do that for me here. And I'm not going to deal with ASGs in this video. So I'm just going to click Next to DNS. And this is where people have the most issues when it comes to dealing with private endpoints. So most of the time when people when companies have a DNS server on site, they will opt to select no here. And basically what that means is, I'm going to come over here. Basically what that means is they're going to take all of this out of the picture. So they're just going to basically run with this here. And so basically what they're saying is my DNS server on-prem will resolve any DNS request for that private zone. So they're going to have to add, once you create a private endpoint, you receive a record. So this is an A record that Microsoft used in their example. When you receive that A record, you're going to have to manually add that A record as a forward lookup zone. This works, but the problem with this is if you have hundreds of resources that you want to be accessed privately, you are going to have to manually go in and add every A record. So if you select yes here, you can utilize Azure DNS, and the A record will automatically be assigned to a private DNS zone. So let me go back here. So if you select yes to integrate with private DNS zone, that A record will be sent here instead and will be automatic. There's no configuration you would really have to do once you select yes. The A record would automatically be there. That eliminates a lot of overhead when it comes to managing A records. All right. So let me go back here. I'm going to click yes here. And for tags, I'm not going to create any tags. I'm just going to review and just going to validate, and I'm just going to create. All right, so our private endpoint is finished deploying. The next step is to configure our DNS forwarder. So going back to this architecture diagram that Microsoft provides, we've already completed a private link endpoint. When we were creating the endpoint, we also created a private DNS zone, and we have an A record inside of that private DNS zone. Now we are going to configure our DNS forwarder. All right, so I am going to go over into my forwarder here. All right, so now that I am in my forwarder, I'm going to click on DNS. So my custom DNS server is running Windows Server, as well as my forwarder is running Windows Server. So both of my DNS servers are running Windows. I'm going to click on DNS Manager. And once I'm in the DNS Manager, I am going to click on Forwarders. And once I'm in the Forwarders tab, I am going to click on Edit. And I am going to enter the IP address for Azure. So basically what I'm doing here, let me erase this. Basically what I'm doing here, I'm telling this forwarder that any DNS query you receive, if you don't have an A record for it, forward it to Azure DNS. That's basically what I'm telling it here. So I'm going to go back to my, I'm going to go back to my forwarder here, and I'm going to enter the IP address for Azure's DNS. I'm going to click OK, and that validates. Click OK, apply, and that's it. So my forwarder is finished. Next, we're going to configure our on-prem internal DNS server to conditionally forward all blob.windows.core.windows.net queries to our conditional forwarder. Real quick, let me show you where I'm going to get the public zone for. So I'm configuring a blob private endpoint. This is public information provided by Microsoft. So it says here for storage accounts, for blob, for public DNS zone forwarders, you're going to enter blob.core.windows.net. So that is what we're going to enter into our on-prem DNS server. So go into our on-prem DNS server here. From your server manager dashboard, we're going to click on DNS, and we are going to click on DNS manager. And once we're inside the DNS manager, we're going to click on the conditional forwarders folder. And once we're in the conditional forwarders folder, we're going to right click and click new conditional forwarder. The DNS domain is what Azure provided us as the public forward zone, which is blob.core.windows.net. And the IP address will be the IP address of our forwarder that we just configured. So in my situation, my IP address of my forwarder is 10.0.0.4. And we're going to click OK. And now we have our conditional forwarder set up. And that is it. That is how you configure a private endpoint to work with Azure DNS. So now we're going to go back to our storage account here. And we're going to see if we can access a test file that I placed in blob storage earlier. So I'm going to go into my overview pane. I'm going to click on containers. I'm going to go into my blob container here. I'm going to click on blob test. And I'm going to see if I can download this test file. Voila. It lets me download it. You can't see my, I'm not sharing my actual desktop, so you can't see that the file actually downloaded, but the file did actually download. And that's pretty much it on how you set up a private endpoint. Some great videos to watch to learn more, to get a deeper dive on private endpoints is John Seville's private endpoint deep dive, private link deep dive. It's about an hour long. It's some good content. And if you really work within Azure and you really work within Azure networking, you really need to understand this. You really should go watch those videos. He also has another video on private resolvers. So ideally, within an Azure environment, you really want to start to use private resolvers. I'm not going to go into detail on what all this does, but it eliminates the need to manage a DNS forwarder. And because when you get a large environment, you're going to need more than just this DNS forwarder. You're going to need to manage that DNS forwarder and make sure it's scaled correctly, to make sure that it's not being overloaded with DNS queries. So ultimately, you want to go into private resolvers. John Seville has a great video on that. I'll link that in the description as well. Also, if you want to get a deep dive on DNS, just DNS and networking in general, I suggest you check out Adrian Cantrell's YouTube video. He has a mini series on networking altogether. It is more so AWS based, but the knowledge that he teaches in this mini series, that knowledge can transfer to anything you do, whether it's on-prem, within Azure, within Google, within AWS. It is just some good knowledge. And if you really want to become good at cloud networking in general, I'm not saying that I'm great at cloud networking, but I feel like I have a pretty decent understanding at cloud networking. I really suggest you go check out those videos. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions, my LinkedIn is tagged below in the description. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We can chat. If you feel like I gave some misinformation, let me know. Next, I probably am going to release a site-to-site VPN video, because that's probably going to be the next big thing I do within my lab environment. I'm going to set up a site-to-site VPN from my lab to Azure, and I am probably going to stop using more so like Cloudflare, and I'm more so going to use an Azure point-to-site VPN while using Azure AD authentication. So that's going to be my next big project, and hopefully I can release an informational video on this. If you like this video, let me know on my LinkedIn, let me know in the comments, let me know by liking the video. If you didn't, let me know. Won't hurt my feelings. But thanks for watching. See ya.